Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering the Opposition. My name is Dr. Nafis Alam, and our topic today will be weathering uncomfortable social gatherings, strategies on interacting with people you may not want to interact with. Now, it's inevitable that the older you get, the more likely it will be that you've made a whole lot of friends in your life. And with that also comes a greater likelihood that you don't get along with everyone, and you have more and more people in your life that you have to interact with, whether they're family, friends of friends, whatever it may be, people that you don't necessarily want to interact with, and you don't like interacting with them for whatever reason. It's not what this particular podcast episode is about, but for whatever the reasons may be, you do have to come across them from time to time, and just going about doing that. Now, different people have different strategies, of course. I'm happy to share mine, which is going to be what I'm going to be doing for much of the podcast today. But with Empowering the Opposition, I also want to give some time to some opposing viewpoints. So for me, I'll start with the way that I navigate through it. There are plenty of people that I enjoy interacting with, of course, just as you do, I'm sure. And then, of course, there are friends and family members who I don't particularly enjoy interacting with. For me, it happens to be some of my family members. And with family, of course, you can't just say no to every family gathering. Inevitably, well, with friends too, sometimes if you want to see one friend who is close with you, it might also mean that you're going to have to interact with friends that you're not close with, but your friend is close with, so your friend's friend, let's say. So whatever the scenario might be, my strategy has generally been just to be cordial. For whatever reason I don't get along with them, I try not to bring that topic of conversation up, whether it has to do with politics, whether it has to do with ideologies, whether it has to do with life choices that I've made, that other people, let's say, might have an issue with. It's just not something that I myself bring up. And of course, inevitably, the other person might bring up these topics, or the course of natural and general conversation may lead you into those topics which are in great contention between you and the person or people that you choose, you don't necessarily like to interact with. So in those circumstances, I just try to avoid it at all costs, and if it happens, then I also don't recommend, at least, if you're similar to me, I don't recommend that you lose yourself just for the purpose of keeping the peace. When the topic does get to a point where, I feel like my particular viewpoints are being challenged, I'm just not the type to let people take shots on me like that. So I've sort of adopted the moniker, I'll never start an argument, but I'm happy to finish one. Now, is that the best way to do things? Probably not. In many ways, keeping the peace is a better idea. But when I felt challenged, I will rise to the challenge, if you will, and I'll do just enough to make my point. But again, just like with this podcast, my intention is never to change anyone's mind. It's only to let them understand where I stand, and also help them understand that I'm aiming to understand where they stand as well. Now, some other opposing viewpoints to this approach, for example, some of my cousins have adopted the idea of just silence at all costs. Anything that offends you or hurts you, you just internalize it, you don't let it out, and that may be good for the time being. And you know what? It may even be good for the long-term future. But the way that I've seen it is that it sometimes tends to eat away at them, like they're not being their true selves, as if they're pretending to be someone that they're not, and holding back and being less of themselves than they wish that they could be. But then again, I have older uncles and aunts and older friends as well who have grown into this particular philosophy, and they navigate through life just fine. And they're just the type to keep the peace. They're comfortable enough with themselves where they don't necessarily have to rise to the challenge. They don't necessarily have to be in a position where they're arguing their points. They're just fine with it, and life just goes on. They're not personally offended by it. They're not hurt by it. I'm just not that kind of person, which maybe if I was a little bit more mature, I would be, but I am who I am. And, that's another kind of approach to it. Now, one other kind of approach that I'll also speak to is the type that's always looking for confrontation. And we all know people like that. And if you don't know someone like that, you are someone like that, right? So people who just seek out confrontation, who will only have conversations with you for the purpose of finding areas of disagreement so that this way they can, build something around that opposing viewpoint. And those people also, if that's how you are, if that's how you operate, if that's who your best self is, then that's perfectly fine too. That was just another way of navigating through life and being in a position where you're interacting in the way that you are. Now, if you are the confrontational type, you might go into a setting and look for a fight. You might look for an argument. If you're the non-confrontational type, you might go into an environment and intentionally avoid all the fights. If you feel something is happening in a particular room and a conversation is going in a direction that you don't want it to go, you might want to escape, get something to eat or something like that. Whereas other people might want to stay there and be more incentivized to stay in that room in order to be able to be a part of that confrontational environment. There's so many different kinds of people out there. As I've mentioned, I fall somewhere in the middle. I'm not really trying to, cause a conflict or put anyone in a position where they feel embarrassed, or even put myself in a position where I feel embarrassed, because there are plenty of times that I've been wrong too. I've been proven wrong plenty of times. So, but at the same time, when and if the time comes where you're being challenged or I'm being challenged, I do tend to rise to the occasion. And in some ways, this translates over into leadership qualities in some ways. The confrontational leader will rarely, be in a position where they are inspiring others to succeed and the organization is at optimal performance. The non-confrontational leader as well is afraid to take those kinds of risks. Whereas sort of someone who falls somewhere in the middle, the balanced leader, will rise when the situation calls for it. But in general, he or she is happy delegating in such a way that they don't necessarily have to take charge at every moment. Now, we are, of course, talking about personal lives and professional lives, so who you are in a professional setting may be different from who you are in a personal setting. And that is also a particular nuance here, right? So if you are going to be interacting with people that you don't like, weathering uncomfortable social gatherings, some social gatherings are personal, where it's family and friends, and you have a choice. You have sort of some ability as to avoid it or start it, so you have those choices there. But from a professional setting standpoint, when you're weathering uncomfortable social professional gatherings, interacting with people you may not want to interact with may be part of your job. And that's when you really have to understand and do a self-assessment and understanding whether or not this is worth it, right? Is it worth it to work with people, work with an organization where you have people that you don't particularly like interacting with? And I'm not alluding to the idea that it's not worth it. Let's be honest. There are plenty of jobs and plenty of careers out there that are, that are so profitable and so cushy and so full of perks and incentives that it doesn't make sense to leave or quit or get fired. It never makes sense to get fired, of course, to leave a position just because there are a few people there that you don't like interacting with, even though you have to interact with them on projects on a regular basis. The idea is always to, of course, keep it professional in that professional setting, and if you can, also keep it professional in a personal setting when you're working with people, when you're hanging out and working with people who you don't necessarily enjoy interacting with. But that's only one side. Of course, as we mentioned, in empowering the opposition, I've already talked about how you can be confrontational and you can be perfectly fine as being the confrontational type because that might be who you are. You'll be just fine being the non-confrontational type if that's who you really are. Ultimately, as I've mentioned in so many podcasts before, it really comes down to self-assessment. Study everything around you. Study the options that you have available to you. Am I going to be confrontational? Am I going to be non-confrontational? Am I going to be somewhere in the middle? Am I going to be different based on a personal setting or a professional setting? Understand the options that you have, and there are plenty, and then make decisions as to what options best fit you and your personality. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'm Dr. Nafis Alam, and this has been Empowering the Opposition. See you next time.